It is such a pleasure to introduce one of my real friends. Dr. Jerry Bergman has produced over 50 books, and at the conclusion of his lecture, I hope everyone visits the book table. He will be there to autograph the books, and the writings, the technical writings he has published, are in the libraries of over 30 countries around the world. He is technically one of the most educated scholars in the world. He has 9 college degrees in science. I didn't know until a few years ago when he and I were both lecturing on the same platform in Indianapolis. I lectured, and I mentioned it in the lecture, that I debated Madalyn Murray O'Hair some time ago in St. Louis. And I stepped off the lectern, off the platform, and he called me over to his side and he said, "You probably didn't know, in my early career, I actually produced the information that Madalyn Murray O'Hair used because I thought atheistic thoughts." Wow. But then he began to read and consider what he had written. And the truth led him to again fully embracing creation, but not only creation, the Bible, the God of the Bible, and the Creator, Jesus Christ. Would you welcome our dear friend, Dr. Jerry Bergman.
It's good to be here. Appreciate all of your time and attention. Hopefully what I say will be helpful. I was asked not too long ago to do a lecture on viruses, and I thought, well, sounds like a good topic. A lot of concern about viruses today for obviously the coronavirus. So I'll be talking about viruses in general at first. But the question is, why did God make viruses? In fact, one of the main arguments, and I know this when I was an atheist, one of the main arguments they use is that if there was a good God, why would he make pathogens like viruses? Doesn't make sense. And that's partially because we think viruses are all bad, period. Well, actually, the idea that God made viruses is based on a false idea, namely that viruses cause disease and little else. Actually, we now know that viruses are very important. In fact, when you say your prayers, you should thank God for making viruses because they're very important. Few viruses came about by mistake, which I'll talk about, but the vast majority of viruses are beneficial, which I'll talk about. Viruses play among the critical roles, okay? It's only the rare Vogue virus that causes problems. So there are many roles. In fact, in your body are trillions of viruses, all silently, faithfully doing their job with nary a complaint. In fact, one reason we don't know much about viruses is because they do their job so well, they don't cause a problem, so therefore why study them? When you're raising money to do research, you want to do research on diseases that cause big problems, like cancer. So a lot of you, I'm sure, are supportive, give money to the various cancer organizations for good reason. Probably you had relatives, friends, or spouse, or children that died of cancer. Well, how many people died of viruses that you know of? Well, we got a few now because of the COVID virus, but by and large, most people don't think much about viruses at all. And one thing I noticed about viruses is, look at all the different shapes. They have enormous designs, very, very different. Tuberculosis virus right here. Influenza, we're all aware of that virus. Adenovirus here. And then, the phage is one of the most interesting ones. And I'll talk about the T-phage virus in a few minutes. But one thing you notice is they are geometrically, many of them are geometrically designed. And that geometric design has a very important function, as we'll talk about. So what are viruses made out of? Well, number one, they are not living, technically. They're not living. But when we destroy a virus, when we kill a virus, we say, well, they're killed. Well, how can you kill something that's not alive? That's a problem. So what we deal with is actually name playing around. They are really called gene machines. They're gene machines. And when we say we kill a virus, really we're disabling the gene machine. So we're not actually killing anything because, well, they're not alive. So what's inside of them? What are they made out of? really, they're not made out of much. They have a protein shell or capsid, and that's covered with markers. And we'll show the markers as well. I can show you right now the markers. These right here should be, well, right here, these are the markers. Now, all of them have markers. It's just not so obvious as is true with the adenovirus. Basically, what I was going to explain, that viruses have a coat, a capsid, and then they have inside of them proteins, a few proteins. Some have very few. And they also have inside of them DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. And DNA is the heart of the virus. And what they do is they take over a cell. They take over your cells because they can't reproduce. They can do nothing but sit around by themselves. So to reproduce, they have to get inside of a cell. And once they're in the cell, the DNA cuts a section out of your cells and puts in that DNA in that other cell, your cell, so that your cell can then begin making new viruses. So they have to commandeer your cells, take over your cells, then they use your cellular mechanisms, the ribosomes and all the mitochondria and all the parts, to make new viruses, and then they can spread, and they spread throughout the body. Okay, so they rapidly grow, and we can actually put genes that we're concerned about in viruses. So we can put experimental genes, and we can use this for therapy. In fact, the genetically modified foods, which are everywhere, are actually made from genetically modified by viruses. So we take a tomato, and we genetically modify using a virus, a lambda virus usually, and the lambda virus puts its genes, and we can add genes to the lambda virus, so it puts the genes that we put in the lambda virus in your cells or in a tomato cell, whatever, an apple cell. And then that changes the plant so that we have traits that we want. Now, a lot of people, they don't want to eat genetically modified foods. They say they're a problem. Actually, we have been modifying genetically foods for 6,000 years. Except we do that by hybridization. We take strains and mix them together. And then we end up with genetically modified new strain. Well, this is just a quicker way of doing it. Genetically modified foods are where we do what we can do by combination. We do it very systematically and deliberately. So we know what genes we're putting in where into the foods, and then we end up with a food that's different. And so many foods around are genetically modified. In fact, in Adam and Eve's day, the apple, I guess, didn't live back there, so I don't know for sure, but the apple was probably a crab apple. Okay, and that's why they think, by the way, that the original fruit that Adam and Eve ate was not an apple, it was a pear. Because as far as we know, there was no apples back then that were edible. The crab apple then was genetically modified to produce all of the apples we have today. We have Delicious, and what are some common apples? What? Roman apples, and what? Granny Smith, and we had all these different kinds of apples. Well, these were all genetically modified.